Ancient Earth History, Part 8, Atlantis and Mu, Chapter 3, by Robert Dawson, February 10th, 2025.
Peace. Frieden, Amani, Eiphnh, Baris, Vrede, Paqe, Paix, Paz, Shanti, Eiphnh, Amani. Since time immemorial, every human civilization has strived for peace as the natural state of being, and once obtained, to hang on and sustain it for as long as possible, as it has been proven over and over again throughout history that peace begets prosperity and harmony. When a harmonious balance is reached in a society, the ideal conditions exist for the natural growth of human consciousness and spirit form.
It is determined and done through the guidance of creation that peace shall be among the life forms, and that one life shall not be against the other, so that love and progress exist equally, and that there is life and not destruction. Canon 17, 174. Pay heed to peace, for it is the assurance of all positive development and unrestricted evolution. Desiderata by Billy.
The travelers from deep space came to Earth to escape the conflict and strife of their homeworlds and star systems, seeking peace with a fresh start on planet Earth. These events are described in the previous articles, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 of the Atlantis and Mu series. We can only imagine the beauty and splendor that accompanied Atlantis and Mu during their period of peaceful growth. It was told by the Plejaren, Simyase, to Billy Meyer that the capital was located at the center of the city of Greater Atlantis, and that it resembled a beam ship. And when the catastrophe occurred that sunk the whole continent, it broke loose from its foundation and sunk with it, slipping away into the sea of time and our collective unconscious. But the once great civilization had already broken from its foundation of peace long before that. According to the contact notes of Billy Meyer, it was 133,000 Earth years ago when the immigrants from deep space arrived anew after a previous world war had left the planet devastated. The continent and city of Atlantis in the North Atlantic, having been used previously by extraterrestrials for millennia, was made habitable again and expanded under the leadership of the Yishvish Atlant. The Plejaren called this Greater Atlantis. His wife, Caryatide, also in Yishwish, began a new settlement in the area of Santorini in the Mediterranean they called Lesser Atlantis, whose descendants we know as the Minoan civilization. And New Atlantis was built beyond the Pillars of Heracles, between the Azores and Spain. Old Atlantis existed at the site upon which Troy would later be built. At the same time, Muras, cousin to Caryatide, built the gigantic city of Mu, but also had its origin in earlier times. And Yishvish Armus settled with his people in the region of Armenia. They had become wiser through all the previous wars they had experienced, and hoped for peace in the great distances if all remained in their realms. Extract from Contact Report 009 Friday, 21st March, 1975, 16:18 hours.
For thousands of years, they lived in complete friendship and in peace, until some scientists again succumbed to the greed for might and wanted to seize the rule.
Plato wrote of this time, the separations that Simyase spoke of, and the peace that resulted.
Once upon a time the gods divided up the earth between them, not in the course of a quarrel. For it would be quite wrong to think that the gods do not know what is appropriate to them, or that knowing it, they would want to annex what property belongs to others. Each gladly received his just allocation and settled his territories, and having done so they proceeded to look after us, their creatures and children, as shepherds look after their flocks. They did not use physical means of control like shepherds who direct their flocks with blows, but brought their influence to bear on the creature's most sensitive part, using persuasion as a steersman uses the hime, to direct the mind as they saw fit and so guide the whole moral creature. The various gods, then, administered the various regions which had been allotted to them. But Hephaestus and Athene, who shared as brother and sister a common character, and pursued the same ends in their love of knowledge and skill, were allotted this land of ours as their joint sphere and as a suitable and natural home for excellence and wisdom. They produced a native race of good men and gave them suitable political arrangements. Their names have been preserved, but what they did has been forgotten because of the destruction of their successors and the long lapse of time. Plato and Timaeus.
For quite a long time, the Minoan civilization had been labeled as peaceful, making reference to Minoan thalassocracy, Pax Minoica, and a rather small number of fortifications. The lack of written information has given vent to researchers' fantasy, and the idea of the Minoan culture as the golden age of humanity was not accidental. The Minoan artists portrayed life as a continuous flow of beauty, an endless game, in which fleeting emotions and joy become the spring of happiness. The Minoan art is important for contemporary humans because it draws attention to a harmonious life in the world of here and now. It carries an incredible power of inspiration and beauty. It brings a feeling of lightness, joy, and a happy flight of a soul into our lives. And that really matters. Excerpt from Between the Land, Sea, and Sky. Some Words on the Art of the Minoan Civilization of Bronze Age Crete, by Tetiana Danilova.
And the stone they quarried beneath the central island all round, and from beneath the outer and inner circles, some of it being white, some black, and some red. Plato in Critias Orichalcum was also in the Atlantean color palette described by Plato. Many ancient writings from Greece mention orichalcum as being an alloy of copper and zinc that was similar to brass and sparkled like fire. The colored rendering on the left depicts what was originally named the Palace of Knossos. But it has since been determined that the term palace was a misnomer placed upon it by archaeologist Arthur Evans. It did not function as a palace, but as for community living. Many of the buildings had 2, 3, and 4 floors using a post and beam construction rarely seen before until modern construction techniques came along in the 20th century. The rendered elevation shown in the middle photo is an area at Knossos that serves as a perfect example of Minoan architectural motifs. Outlining the top parapet edge are the dual projections representing the horns of the Minotaur, a creature with a bull's head and a human body. The alternating pattern of black and white stone contrasted with accents of red was popularly used. To the right is an interior shot depicting the use of indirect lighting with the use of light wells penetrating through multiple floors and spaced at intervals. Climate change reveals new archaeological site. In 2010, drought conditions in northern Iraqi Kurdistan caused the water level of a Tigris River reservoir to lower so much that it revealed a mysterious archaeological site approximately where shown on the map with white arrow. Clay tablets with cuneiform writing recovered at the site suggest that it may have been part of an obscure culture called the Mitanni. It is thought that the Mitanni, the Indo-Aryan of later Vedic era, had migrated from India to the Middle East in the 2nd millennium BCE. An article in Archaeology magazine proposes they may have been descended from people who spoke a version of Old Indic derived from Sanskrit, the language of the Rig Veda. This theory is supported by Contact Report 070, Thursday, 6th January 1977, 0001 hours.
But then came the great Aryans, who moved between the Caspian Sea and Ararat, and took possession of the clay brick towns of the mixed folks, which had reached a good level of prosperity as a result of the earlier invading Aryans and the returning descendants of the Sumerians.
The archaeological site confirms that it was built of clay brick, as can be seen in these photos. And the Armenians, descendants of Yishvish Armas, lived in the area between the Caspian Sea and Ararat. The land of Ararat, also called Urartu, is identified on the map. And a partially reconstructed wall mural found in one of the interior rooms at the site sheds light on what Sim-Yase meant by mixed folks. The mural design is unmistakably Minoan. When it is compared to the Minoan elevation at Knossos, which appears earlier, they both have a black and white checkered trim band, they both have the Minotaur motif, and both have background field of reddish and bluish color. Plus, there's something else that's surprising. The mural's design is a composition of alternating panels depicting the head of Minotaur, the head of Pasiphae, the wife of King Minos, and a peace symbol. To the far right is the correct peace symbol, Frieden symbol, and Figu open letter 20 provides an explanation of all its components. There are writings in ancient Greek literature which record that the Minoans indeed had colonies in the area of the archaeological site. Homer, the earliest Greek poet, provides a considerable number of references to King Minos of Crete, as do later authors. Above all, King Minos appears in historical Greek literature as a powerful king, whose navy enabled him to rule over wide dominions and to police his empire of the sea, his thalassocracy. Overseas territories were attributed to Minos as early as Hesiod. Writing in the 8th century BCE, Minos, his children, and his brothers were said to have founded a great many colonies in the Mediterranean. In Italy and Sicily to the west, at Miletos and in Lycia in western and southern Turkey, on the Levantine coast to the east, in Libya to the south, in central Greece and the Troad to the north. G. L. Huxley, Minoans in Greek Sources. La Parisienne. When French archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans first began to uncover a certain wall mural at the Palace of Knossos on Crete, he was astonished. He proceeded very carefully with the excavating, for the woman that slowly appeared in front of him was unlike any he had seen before. She was unmistakably modern. Her hair is black and curly, with one curl springing down onto her forehead, and others cascading down her neck and upper back. Her large, darkly outlined eye reminds us of Egyptian style, but her bright red lips are unique. She wears an elaborately woven blue and red striped dress, with a blue banded edge attached with red flecked loops. Tied to the back of the dress is a sacred knot, as Evans first called it. This is a loop of long cloth tied with another loop at the nape of the neck, leaving a length of the cloth trailing down the back. Shortly after it was first discovered by Arthur Evans, it was seen by Edmond Potier, a famous art historian of Greek pottery, who likened her charming look to the contemporary women of Paris at the time where wearing lipstick had become vogue. But more particularly by the garment that was worn by the female statue who stood on the top of the monumental gate at the main entrance to the recently opened Paris World's Fair, Exposition Universelle. The statue was named La Parisienne by the public, and she greeted the 51 million visitors in her floating cloak as ambassador of peace and goodwill for the city of Paris. Evans agreed with Potier, and the mural has been known as La Parisienne ever since. Today it is a permanent exhibit at the Archaeological Museum of Heraklion. The naturalism and sense of liveliness found in Minoan wall painting is another aspect of the continuous innovation we see in their culture. Louise Hitchcock, archaeologist in Aegean archaeology at Melbourne University. Greek-born fashion designer Mary Katrantzou took several trips as a child to the Knossos Palace on Crete. The modern look of the Minoan women depicted in the mural paintings that she saw there left a strong impression in forming her own design aesthetic later in her life. Known for her groundbreaking digital fashion prints, she returned to her roots by showcasing the Knossos murals directly onto the dresses presented at London Fashion Week 2016. The entire Minoan mural dress collection. The artistic style seen in the Romanian blouse, painted by Henri Matisse, has been compared to the Minoan prints painted in a wall mural at Knossos and seen in the middle. Matisse's interest in Minoan culture continued in his illustrated book, Pasiphae, Chant de Minos. Les Crétois, 1944, wherein Matisse retells the story of the wife of King Minos and the Minoan bull through striking linoleum engravings. But according to Billy Meyer, the real story is much different. Extract from Contact Report 7:50 Saturday, 22nd August 2020, 0017 hours.
But what prompted me to let myself be taken back to Minoan times was the reason for wanting to find out how, why, and from what the Minotaur legend arose. And this I was indeed able to find out. The reality being that the Minotaurus legend had only arisen almost 3 centuries after the death of King Minos, and was based on something that had nothing whatsoever to do with the belief in the sea god Poseidon. The effective fact was that, as your daughter Simyase and I were no doubt able to learn and ascertain at the sites of the events of the time, Pasiphae, the wife of King Minos, was impregnated by him, and then gave birth to a son who was physically deformed, similar to the Elephant Man who lived in England in the last century.
Like Joseph Carey Merrick seen on the left, the so-called Elephant Man. The second son of King Minos and his wife Pasiphae was also severely physically deformed and had a certain resemblance to a bull's head, as well as a completely disfigured figure and face. And as was the case then, and as is also the case today, the boy was disowned by his parents as a result of his already congenital physical deformity. At that time, disabled children were usually killed at birth, but Minotaur, as he was called, was not. The bust of Minotaur, shown on the right, is on display at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. The whole Minotaur story, as told by Billy, goes on to explain that there was a war between Minoa Lesser Atlantis and Athens. This is significant because in Plato's account of the Atlantean story, there was also a war between Atlantis and Athens in which Athens defeated Atlantis to cause its eventual downfall. But in Billy's account, it was Minoa, that is to say, Lesser Atlantis, that defeated Athens. The Greek god of war was named Ares. Ares was perhaps the most unpopular of all the Olympian gods because of his quick temper, aggressiveness, and unquenchable thirst for conflict, a description that matches very well with the Pleiadian characterization of Ares the Barbarian. In ancient Greek art, he was depicted as either a mature, bearded warrior armed for battle or a nude, beardless youth with a hand weapon such as a spear or sword. He was commonly portrayed in some act of combat, conveying the idea of the ideal warrior and romanticizing a glorification of war. He was described by the poet Hesiod in his epic Theogony, from the Greek Theogonia, meaning generations of the gods, as shield-piercing Ares and city-sacking Ares. The god represented the more brutal and bloody side of battle. The Pylos combat agate. In 2015, a discovery made by husband and wife archaeology team, Jack Davis, a professor of Greek archaeology, and Sharon Stocker, a senior research associate both at the University of Cincinnati, has forced art historians to reassess their understanding of ancient artwork. It is a Minoan stone carving of unparalleled sophistication and detail. Looking at the image for the first time was a very moving experience, and it still is. "It's brought some people to tears," Dr. Stocker said. "It seems that the Minoans were producing art of the sort that no one ever imagined they were capable of producing," Professor Davis observed. Due to the seal's small size and veining on the stone, many of the miniature details are only clearly visible via photomicroscopy. In the middle detail of the trailing hair of the victor, the two cords of his necklace, which are threaded with beads, can be seen directly above the detailed waves of hair. Image credit: University of Cincinnati. In a side-by-side comparison, the size of the head and hair details on the agate are several times smaller than George Washington's head depicted on a modern U.S. quarter. Indeed, many of the seal's details, such as the intricate weaponry ornamentation and jewelry decoration, become clear only when viewed with a powerful camera lens and photomicroscopy. Some of the details on this are only a half millimeter big. They're incomprehensibly small. The once peace-loving Minoans had come to embrace war instead. In the early 5th century BCE, the poet Bacchylides, who was himself from Crete, wrote this: "Warlike Minos came with a host of Cretans in 50 ships with swift sterns. By the will of Zeus who brings glory, he married the ample-bosomed maiden Dexithea and left her half of his people, men who were devoted to Ares, god of war. Then, after distributing this mountainous land to them, King Minos, he of Europa's bloodline, sailed back to Knossos, his beloved city. After 9 months, the fair-haired maiden Dexithea bore Euxanthios to rule over the celebrated island of Chaos." Excerpted from Ode L 113-27 edition. R.C. Jebb, translator. By G. L. Huxley Bacchylides makes a point of the fact that Minos was of Europa's bloodline. In Greek mythology, Europa was the mother of Minos and Zeus was his father, but they were not married. To put it mildly, Zeus abducted Europa and carried her off to the island of Crete, where over time she gave birth to Minos and eventually 2 additional sons. Zeus provided Europa with 3 high-tech gifts. The first was a bronze man, Talos, the giant android who served as a guard to her on the island of Crete. Talos was discussed earlier in Chapter 1. The second was a dog, Lelaps, which could hunt and catch anything she wanted. The last one was a javelin that had the power to hit the target, whatever it was. Such stories of extraterrestrial gods having entanglements with Earth women occurs quite often in ancient Greek mythology, and is mentioned several times in the contact notes as well as in OM, because it was considered forbidden to mix their gene pools. The Aryans were descendants of Eris. Excerpt from Contact Report 070 Thursday, 6 January 1977, 0001 hours.
You may be right. But now the other thing, where we are also interested in the history of the Aryans. If you know anything about it?
Sure. At which events should I start?
Start where the earliest ancestors were still in their original home. Name the time when they first came to Earth, etc.
As you wish. So, at the beginning of our contacts, I have already mentioned in detail the history of the destruction and reconstruction of the original home worlds, the
Note: Simyase's explanations are quite thorough in this passage and is recommended reading.
After 2,000 years, this hate-drenched people was so far along that it could venture an attack on the Earth. Therefore, it manned its ships and came newly to the Earth, and indeed under the leadership of the Giza Arus the Barbarian. This happened 113,000 years ago. Eris was extremely bestial and barbarous in his disposition, and his power was feared. Like Pelagon, already thousands of years before, Arus also had 200 high-level scientists with him, who he made sub-leaders. In a lightning action, they fell upon the earth, robbing, murdering, and taking possession of the land. Primarily, they conquered the distant land in the northern regions, where the climate was moderate and very good. These were those regions, which are traditionally known to you as Hyperborea, and which were far in the north, before an upset of the Earth shifted its axis, so that the then regions exist today, where you name Florida. Coming from the north, Eris's son, Eris II, set out and fell upon those lands which today you call India, Pakistan and Persia, and so forth, whereby they struck the earliest forefathers of the Sumerians, who, peace-loving, fled and set down far in the south, folk of dark-colored skin, but by your terms, not Negroid, but like Europeans, and of tall growth, risen from a race of former Syrian refugees, who had likewise settled on the earth 133,000 years ago, as did the refugees from the Pleiadian system. Named after Eris II, the India of today was at that time called Aryan, which, however, split off from Hyperborea after a few centuries, after 210 years, to be exact, and joined with the inhabitants of Mu and Agartha, while from Hyperborea, Arus I constantly troubled Mu and Greater Atlantis by wicked war activities in order to become their ruler. During around half a millennia, or said very precisely, during 502 years, those war machinations continued until Arus I, who in the meanwhile had become old and weak, succeeded in infiltrating wicked elements of his hater humans into the leading controlling ranks of Atlantis and Mu, who secretly stirred up violence and hate for so long, as also did their descendants over several centuries, until through boundless intrigues, Mu and Atlantis were able to be completely destroyed some centuries later, while the only few survivors were beaten into servitude. However, great scientists, in knowledge of the coming things and conscious of their powerlessness, set off in spaceships and fled towards the early homeworlds in the Pleiadian systems, where they were affably received. I indeed do not need to speak yet again about the destruction of Atlantis and Mu, because you will find that as a separate chronicle in the explanations given to you. So it only remains for me to report that Arus XI, as a very distant descendant of Arus I, was murdered in his old age many thousands of years later, and around 100,000 years after the destruction of Mu and Atlantis, by his third-born son Jehavon, after which this one took over command of the Hater people in order to rule these and 3 earthly peoples and the Hyperboreans himself. The first Earth folk consisted of the very distant descendants of the Armus folks, who had lived where the region of Armenia is today. These were descendants of the Giza Armus, who settled there with his race 133,000 years ago, after he had emigrated from the Pleiadian systems. The second Earth folk, which fell under Jehavon's control, were the descendants of the Aryans, who meanwhile had mingled themselves with the still very underdeveloped, pure earthly and lethargic native population, after the Sumerians were expelled. Still to mention is that among the very distant descendants of Eris, who had subjugated the lands in the north, there existed elements in great number, who, until in the time of Jehav, preserved themselves as the Arusists. These, a group of 160,000 humans, were named the Great Aryans because they still advocated the ideas of Aris I. They even released themselves from the powerful control of Jehav and wandered, plundering, through the land, from northwest to the east, where they penetrated into that land where, in earlier times, Aris II had settled with his people and expelled the Sumerians, where, in the meantime, however, the then Aryans mixed themselves with the low native population and forgot their actual origin. Also, in the meantime, the descendants of the Sumerians returned to their old homeland, so also they settled there again. But then came the Great Aryans, who moved between the Caspian Sea and Ararat, and took possession of the clay brick towns of the mixed folks, which had reached a good level of prosperity as a result of the earlier invading Aryans and the returning descendants of the Sumerians.
The Nazi search for an Aryan heritage. In 1938, Heinrich Himmler, head of the German SS, sent a 5-member team to Tibet to search for the origins of the supposed Aryan race. Adolf Hitler believed that Aryan Nordic people had entered India from the north long ago, and that the Aryans had committed the crime of mixing with the local un-Aryan people, losing the attributes that had made them racially superior to all other people on Earth. As disturbing as the notion may have seemed at one time before, when now compared to the Aryan history that Sim Yase tells Billy Meyer in Contact Report 70, it may be close to the truth. During the Tibet expedition, Nazi scientists collected thousands of specimens while comparing locals to a list of facial features and concluded that they descended from the Aryans. In the middle, SS anthropologist Bruno Berger would take measurements of the skulls and facial details of Tibetans and make face masks. He said, especially to collect material about the proportions, origins, significance, and development of the Nordic race in this region. At the right is SS zoologist Ernst Schaefer during his last expedition to Tibet in 1938. Included in with their philosophy was Atlantis, where they believed the Aryans also once lived, and that it was situated somewhere between England and Portugal in the Atlantic Ocean. It allegedly sunk after being struck by a divine thunderbolt. All the Aryans who survived supposedly moved on to more secure places. The Himalayan region was believed to be one such refuge, Tibet in particular because it was famous for being the roof of the world. The German expedition was abruptly cut short in August 1939 by the inevitability of the war. Another German archaeologist and eventual SS commander, Edmund Kiss, promoted the idea that Bolivia's famous historical site called Tiwanaku was actually Atlantis. Another theory the group held was that Earth at some point collided with its moon, causing a cataclysmic destruction of Atlantis and creating an ice age. Trying to survive their new glacier-filled reality, ancient Atlanteans were believed to have fled to the high Andes, where life could still survive. That's how they would have ended up in Bolivia. Above are photographs taken from Edmund Kiss's book, Das Gläserne Meer, The Glass Sea, 1930, zeigend hypothetische Rekonstruktionen von Tiwanaku, basierend auf den archäologischen Ruinen der Existierenden zu der Zeit, als dort erkundet hat. The events surrounding the settlement of Tiwanaku, or Tiahuanaco, are explained in Ancient Earth History, Part 3. It was built by an extraterrestrial race, but it was not the Atlanteans. The man who started the worst war in modern history was meant to bring peace excerpt from Contact Report 036 Monday, 20th October 1975, 13:57 hours.
I am only allowed to give you a few details about that, but they will be very interesting for you. Adolf Hitler was a genius in many respects. His knowledge ranged from various fields of art and technology to various sciences and the use of the powers of suggestion. In his inner form, he was an incarnated life form of very good values. However, he was not a human being with a highly developed spirit, but rather a human being with values of intellect and rationality, destined to lead the entire earthly politics and economy, as well as all states, in a certain positive direction so as to create a peaceful, united world and Earth humankind. For this purpose, he was trained and incarnated at his place. He was intended to give the Earth a new appearance and to initiate new forms of development through positive Gewaltsam-Agewaltsamkeit, powerful actions using logic and rationality. This was strictly monitored and overseen. But ultimately, all efforts were in vain, and he was not able to fulfill his task in the form in which it was envisaged. Via the then leaders of the Thule Society and their clairvoyant Hanussen first, the Giza intelligences managed to take possession of the VA of Adolf Hitler and to abuse him for their dark and malicious purposes, without him resisting it, because a delusional greed for power had flared up in him himself. In addition to this undertaking, innumerable forces in the form of human beings of Earth who had fallen prey to the Giza intelligences were regarding their consciousness manipulated and placed in his closest vicinity, whose influence he was also unable to withstand. So he was soon forced to act against his own destiny and to do things that did not correspond to his destiny.
Erich Jan Hannessen was born Hermann Steinschneider on June 2, 1889, an Austrian Jew who made quite a name for himself as a clairvoyant, hypnotist, and prophet. His most famous prediction came on February 26, 1933, when he held a séance in his Palace of the Occult shown in the middle, and foresaw the Reichstag fire, the event that would help Hitler and the Nazi Party to take absolute control over Germany. On the far right is a photograph of Hannessen giving a demonstration of his power of hypnosis. Unfortunately, there is no narrative or writing explaining precisely the hypnosis techniques that John Hannessen could use. Excerpt from Contact Report 260 Tuesday, 3rd February 1998, 22:27 hours.
You once said before that Adolf Hitler also had or just would have had the task of creating a united Earth world.
That was actually so. That is correct. The path that he then took, however, even with terror and war, was absolutely wrong, and was neither in his destiny, nor in any guidelines assigned to him, nor even in our interests. The reason for his wrongly chosen path developed quite early on, when he secretly came in contact with the Thule Society of that time, in consequence of which he also came in contact with Hermann Steinschneider, who also belonged to the Thule Society and supported its unfair goals, and who called himself the clairvoyant Erich Jan Hannessen. Steinschneider, that is to say Hannessen, moved in all circles of major Nazi figures, among whom he had many clients, so even also Adolf Hitler, who became enslaved to him, and indeed, even before he seized the leadership for himself. Steinschneider Hannessen emerged as a middleman between the Thule Society and Hitler, and so to speak, directed Adolf Hitler according to the Thule Society's leader's will. The efforts of the leaders at that time of the Thule Society went out for the attainment of world domination. Consequently, already very early on, they allowed Steinschneider to influence and shape Hitler in this direction, by what means this then began, in accordance with their will, with terror and murder, to trigger World War II in the end.
Former Nazi ranking member Otto Strasser told a psychoanalyst in 1942, Hitler took regular lessons in speaking and in mass psychology from a man named Hannessen, who was also a practicing astrologer and fortune teller. He was an extremely clever individual who taught Hitler a great deal concerning the importance of staging meetings to obtain the greatest dramatic effect. The Führer learned crowd control through gestures and the use of garish poses from Hannessen. Above left, Hannessen stands adjacent to Adolf Hitler during a public speech. On the right, Hannessen taught Hitler certain gestures that he himself used in his performances to mesmerize the audience, such as at the Scala Variety Theater in Berlin at the height of his career, when sold-out tickets were being peddled on the black market at gold prices to see the so-called paranormal powers of the German Rasputin, as he was nicknamed. In 1943, the American psychiatrist Walter Charles Langer wrote in a report for the U.S. Secret Service that confirmed the role of Jan Hannessen with Adolf Hitler. Jan Hannessen is said to have taught lessons on eloquence and body language to seduce crowds for the dictator's speeches. Hannessen was the middleman between the Thule Society and Hitler. But the Thule Society itself was being controlled by an even more powerful group behind the scenes, who were also the descendants of Aris in addition to the Aryans, called the Giza intelligences. But as opposed to the Aryans, they were able to keep knowledge of their origin, their intelligence, and at least some portion of their technology.
But Arusam secretly returned to the earth and settled down with his army in the land of Egypt, in the old cubicle constructions which had existed there unused for more than 70,000 years. Deep in the interior of the earth and deep below the pyramids, they established themselves securely, whereby they converted the rooms and buildings deep below the present pyramids of Giza as a center for their wicked purposes, from where they and their descendants since then tried to realize their tyrannical plans.
Excerpt from Contact Report 036 Monday, 20th October 1975, 13:57 hours.
A few days ago, through painstaking research and surveillance, we were able to gain a clear understanding of the fact that Ashtar-Sharan actually exists, and that the only reason we could not recognize him was because he fraudulently wrapped himself in this name. A part of his real name is Arusiak, along with another sequence of names, and he is a cousin of the Supreme Giza intelligence. On their behalf, he controlled the old German Thule Society, in which he introduced two strong telepathic factors, but which also influenced many Thule Society members and various outside groups on a telenotic basis, including those who received the pseudo-messages of Ashtar-Sharan. Sharon's machinations in this regard continue today and will continue in the future, but no longer in connection with the reorganized Thule Society. Update. Per Contact Report 260, Ashtar-Sharan was eliminated in the Dell universe during a serious battle as he was attacking a planet. Telenautical simply means telenosis or telenothi. You know hypnosis, which is based on and built upon objective and acoustic influences. In contrast to hypnosis, telenosis does not require any optical or acoustic influences, but only certain high-frequency oscillations, which are transmitted inaudibly to humans and otherwise undetectable by means of high-tech apparatus and devices. For example, radio, telephone, radio, television, and other communication and transmission apparatus and devices, although impulse telepathy also belongs to this.
Because Hannessen was the middleman between the Thule Society and Hitler, and the Thule Society was being influenced by the Giza intelligences, his hypnosis technique may have been augmented with telenosis. The social engineering of the German people did not end there, however, but extended with wide-scale use of runes which invoked an unconscious impulse or feeling. The best known, of course, is the swastika, which was ubiquitous in Nazi Germany for several years before and during World War II. The left is the spirit-teaching symbol for darkness of life, non-existence of life, Lebensdunkelheit, Lebensnicht-Existenz. But when the arms are properly rotating in the opposite direction, it has just the opposite meaning, life and good fortune. In Sanskrit, swastika means well-being and was used by Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains for millennia. And before World War II, it was even used extensively in the West for advertising. The Nazi Schutzstaffel Protection Squadron, SS, used stylized runes as their logo SS, and was a major paramilitary organization under Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The symbol became so ubiquitous in German society that it was frequently typeset using runes rather than letters. An extra key was added to German typewriters to enable them to type the double sig logo with a single keystroke. To the right of the SS symbol above is the spirit-teaching symbol for hatred, aggression, Hass, aggression. A variation to the spirit-teaching symbol for danger Gafar was used on planes, personnel vehicles, tanks, and weaponry of various sort. Below is a comparison chart of certain runes explaining how they were used by the Germans, and their corresponding meaning found to the closest equivalency in the spirit-teaching lexicon of symbols. As we can see with these examples of the misuse of symbols, the education of their correct meaning, value, empowers the human to strengthen their consciousness accordingly through mindfulness. The reintroduction of the teaching of creation energy, which reveals how to bring balance to an unbalanced world, can be found in the writings and books of Billy Meyer. The lesson of two great cultures, Atlantis and Mu, who mutually annihilated one another, needs to be remembered now, more than ever.
The Peace Meditation. In spring 1984, the FIGU members in Switzerland began with the so-called Peace Meditation. Organized by our extraterrestrial friends, the Plejaren, this Peace Meditation PM was intended to bring about a change for the better with regard to the future of humanity on Earth. This works by sending out powerful and logical impulses through which a polarity is built up which is opposite to the negative power field, which surrounds Earth much like a huge bell, and which influences the human beings and all of nature. Over several centuries, this negative power field has been, that is to say, is, built up by the human beings by means of religious, sectarian, and extremist thinking that is out of the control of the good human nature. Therefore, the idea was to send out, with the help of more than 3.5 thousand million human beings from the Plejaren Federation, via a telemeter disk hovering high above the Simyase Silver Star Center, and by means of some other devices, powerful counter-impulses on Earth, with obvious success as it has turned out in the meantime. Excerpt from the Peace Meditation, a FIGU article by Christian Frenner, Switzerland. Please join in. The stakes could not be any greater.
The Baigong pipes and the Delhi alien relic scenic spot. The Gobi Desert in northwest China is predominantly a very barren and rocky landscape, but an exciting place for dinosaur hunters, a testament to a much different, more hospitable environment where such large animals thrived in days gone by. In 1996, a group of American scientists, while on the trail of dinosaur fossils in the Qinghai province, came upon a most unusual and foreboding landscape. Scattered on the shores of a saltwater lake were countless oddly formed, disfigured stone shapes, all of which were standing upright or out of the ground. This debris field laid between the Salt Lake and Mount Baigong, which has an even more curious, dilapidated pyramid shape at its top. And interspersed with the stones, they saw what was unmistakably man-made pipes. The American scientists reported their findings to the local authorities in Delingha. A metallurgical analysis of the pipes was conducted sometime later, which found that the pipes were composed of 92% common minerals and metals, but 8% unknown elements. Additional pipes would later be discovered flowing under the lakebed, onto the shore, and deep inside the pyramid itself. Documented by Chinese writer Bai Yu, the pipes reside in 3 caves within the mountain, although only one cave remains accessible due to the collapse of the other. When this information spread locally, they were dubbed ET relics, and tour buses were provided as part of a local tourist attraction to view the peculiar shapes as well as a series of mysterious symbols and unsolved letters on the rock formations of sand and stone. The tubes, ranging from needle size to 16 inches in diameter, reach from deep inside the mountain to the saltwater lake 260 feet away. Many of the hollow pipes are uniform in size and seem to be placed purposefully. There is also a freshwater lake nearby, but with no pipes leading into it. They surely relied on saltwater, but for what purpose? And what is to be understood by the massive blob with a glassy surface and streaking colors? English Indian analyst David Davenport observed similar phenomenon in the territory of Rajasthan in northwestern India. A layer of exceptionally radioactive cinder was found close to Jodhpur, which was sufficient to warrant an examination. Afterward, the old remnants of Harappa toward the north and Mohenjo-Daro toward the west were uncovered in Pakistan, where proof of an atomic blast going back a great many years was discovered. The evidence lay within a 50-yard radius at the site of what seems to be the impact epicenter, where articles were found intertwined and glassified. Rocks had been dissolved by temperatures of around 1500 degrees Celsius and transformed into a glass-like substance. Located close by to the pipes is the Delhi Alien Relic Scenic Spot, identified with the red circle drawn on the satellite image. The 2 lakes, one freshwater and the other saltwater, are also shown. Figu passive member Chen Jianting personally visited the site and took the photograph we see on the right. A flat, huge circular pattern sits right next to the Delhi Alien Relic Scenic Spot, which sadly, our government has permanently closed since 2020 for unspecified purposes. Fortunately, Grace was able to get there before it closed and take these stunning photographs. She also provided the 4 pictures of the pipes.
News article: Chinese scientists to head for suspected ETR relics.
Delinga Qinghai, June 19, 2002. Xinhuanet. A group of Mine Chinese scientists will go to West China's Qinghai province this month to closely examine the relics thought by some to have been left by extraterrestrial begets. It will be the first time scientists seriously study the mysterious site near Delmga City the depths of the Kaidam Basin. According to government sources with the Haixi Mongohan and Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture, where Delinga is located. The site, known by local people as the ET Retics, is on Mount Baigong, about 40 kilometers to the southwest of Delinga City. On the north of the mountain are twin lakes, dubbed as the Lover Lakes, one with fresh water and the other with salty water. The so-called ET relic structure is located on the south bank of the salty lake. It looks like a pyramid and is between 50 meters high. At the front of the pyramid are 3 caves with tenangular openings. The 2 smaller caves have collapsed and are inaccessible, but the cave in the middle is the biggest.
with its floor stand being 2 meters above the ground and its top 8 meters above the ground. This cave is about 6 meters in depth. Inside there is a half pipe about 40 centimeters in diameter, tiltimji. From the top to the inner end of the cave, another pipe of the same diameter goes into the earth with only its top visible above the ground. Above the cave are a dozen pipes of various diameters which arve in into the mountain. All the pipes are red-brownish, the same color as that of surrounding rocks. Scattered about the caves and on the bank of the salty lake area, large number of rusty scraps, pipes of veinous diameters and strangely shaped stones. Some of the pipes run into the lake accord MG to Qin Jianwen, head of the publicity department of the Delmka government. The scraps were once taken to a local smeltery for analysis. The result shows that they are made up of 30% ferric oxide with a large amount of silicon dioxide and calcium oxide. 8% of the content could not be identified. The large content of silicon dioxide and calcium oxide is a result of long interaction between iron and sandstone. Which means the pipes must be very old, said Liu Shaolin, the engineer who did the analysis.
The smelting analysis of the pipes also concluded that the pipes were made at least 150,000 years ago. The contact notes state that Murus came to Earth and started the city of Mu about 133,000 years ago. But it was built upon an existing city that was formed in earlier times. Or perhaps the dating method is in error. The notion that this area is indeed the remains of the city of Mu is quite tantalizing to say the least, and perhaps more information may come to light from Figu. To further add to the mystery, Zheng Jiandong, a geology research fellow from the China Earthquake Administration, told state-run newspaper People's Daily in 2007 that some of the pipes were found to be highly radioactive. The slick surface of the rock and streaking colors would be signs of atomic melting.
Another thing is nuclear technology. This has tempted human beings to world power ambitions and to wars since time immemorial. So extraterrestrials have also operated on board with this technology, which is also supported by legends and archaeological facts. For example, ancient Indian scriptures, as already mentioned, report about wars between gods in space and on Earth. Especially in Sanskrit, there are more than enough written traditions that not so long ago, highly technical wars took place on Earth and in space, through which many things on Earth were destroyed. The remains of atomic melting, as well as cities that were literally turned upside down, have long been known to archaeology, but this is usually kept quiet from the public, not least by the religious powers that want to maintain their false history of origins and the religious myth of creation with regard to the world and human beings by all means.
Excerpt from the article, Facts from World Space by the Playaren and Billy, Edward A. Meyer, The Long U Caves. An archaeological mystery. If a civilization with advanced technology were to build survival shelters, what would they look like? Probably a lot like the Long U Caves of East China. It is unknown when the caves were created or by whom. Archaeologists have recovered glazed clay pot in the silt soil of the cavern floor, which dates to the Western Han Dynasty from 206 BC to AD 23, but it is highly unlikely that this was made by the original builders of the caves themselves. On the contrary, the series of multiple caves are all carved out of solid rock with approximately the same proportions in almost every way. The slope of the ceiling is the same. There are 3 to 4 columns in each cave carved out of the same rock, extending from the cave floor to the cave roof as a single contiguous hole. Each cave has a large sunken basin cut out at the bottom which continuously supplies fresh water naturally fed from underground aquifers. The pitch of the sloped roofs is ideal for promoting the natural circulation of air by convection. And the caves are deep enough below the surface of the earth for the temperature to remain constant throughout the year. Chen Jianting has also visited the Longyu caves and has this to say: each cave is roughly 1,000 square meters, 30 meters high, and has 3 to 4 stone pillars. There are 7 caves currently open to tourists. According to the government, there are more than 200 similar caves in the neighborhood. Longyu is the pronunciation of the Chinese word for dragon in flight. Unfortunately, in an effort to attract more tourists, the local government modified the original surface at several cave wall locations and engraved images of traditional Chinese iconography and added statues as seen in this video. As Grace Chan put it, the local government removed the original traces and excavated various statues of Buddha to make it a site related to Buddhism. Unbelievable! Our government really seriously damaged the original appearance of the site. The existing steps that were built into the cave walls are sized too large for the average human of today, sparking speculation that they were used by giants. Consequently, newer, smaller-sized stairs have been added, either built directly on top of the old ones or built separately for the access of tourists. No food remains were found in the cave, nor any signs of smoking fire, such as black soot. But without fire, how could the ancient diggers have produced light in the cave? A variety of speculation has been offered by so-called experts as to why the underground space was created, but they really amount to nothing more than wild guesses. If they were meant to be survival shelters for all we know, the builders may not have even been able to get to them in time. Special thanks goes to Figu passive member Chen Jianting, nicknamed Grace, in China for providing first-hand photographs and eyewitness reporting of the Baigong pipes, the Delhi alien relic scenic spot, and the Longyu caves.